Hello? Uh-oh. Is this not on? Te- Test 1, 2. Can you hear me? Test 1, 2. Oh, there we go. All right. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on behalf of Faith in Action. We're hosting our first in-person event here, I think, in maybe 3 years. So that's a good thing to do. So the events in Iran of the last 5 months can seem, relatively distant to us here, partly because the media coverage has been very sparse as well, and it makes it hard to appreciate the true significance and understand what's been going on. So we're really grateful to have this opportunity today, and grateful to Gila for helping to facilitate it. And I want to allow Gila to introduce our guest speaker.
Thank you, James. I'm pleased to introduce you to Ali Akbar Mahdi, Professor of Sociology and Anthropology, currently teaching at the California State University of Northridge, to speak and answer questions about the protest movement in Iran. Akbar received his BA degree in sociology from the National University of Iran and his MA and PhD from Michigan State University. His research interests have been in social structure in the Middle East, the role that women, political fractionalism, social classes, and globalization has held on Iranian society. He's widely published, including several books, and authored numerous research on topics ranging from the sociology of knowledge to the political economy of Iran and Islam. He has received recognition for teaching excellence at the Michigan State and Adrian College, and he's a winner of the Wealth Award. There's going to be a refreshment after the talk.
Thank you, Gilad. Thanks, the Unitarian Church, for inviting me. I'm very glad to be here today. I will have a PowerPoint nowadays, it's the nature of the beast, the nature of business. I cannot go to class without having a PowerPoint. That would be the biggest failure of any teacher. So anyway, I have a lot of data, and so I like to talk with data, and then we'll get there. So can we start with the PowerPoint? The first slide is going to be a little clip that I received. One of the things about this latest movement that we want to talk about, which started in September with the death of Mahsa Amini. You see her picture here. And she was a Kurdish young woman, who came to Tehran with his brother to capital. She's from the Kurdish area, western part of Iran. And she was arrested by the morality. This is a challenge, controversial concept, morality police. Basically, the police who enforces the covering of women's body and hair when they are in public. They're in control of women's body in the public arena. And they would arrest and so on. She got arrested. In fact, she did not have really, if you put on a scale of 1 to 10, 0 to 10, obviously she would have been somewhere covered almost 8.5. So her little hair that was a little bit exposed in front, and the manner that she was arrested. Her brother kept begging that, look, we are from a different town and we are here, we don't have anybody, would you please help us and let her go? They don't. They take her to the van, and whatever happens, she was taken to a re-education center where there's a classroom type, and they all sit down. There is a video that later, after her death, a regime in defense of herself made up her video. It's partially probably the case or not, I don't know. I have my own suspicion, whether it's his hair or someone, because the camera is from very distance on the top. But anyway, this young woman, at one point, gets up from her seat, come to the teacher who's supposed to teach them, say something, and the teacher says something to her that all of a sudden she collapses. But the collapse for me was a little bit suspicious, because if you collapse, you fall. But if I collapse without looking and then I hold the podium, then I have some conscience. I don't know. But whatever it was, she was taken to the hospital, and according to many contradictory reports from various authorities, she was dead, or she died in the hospital, and so on. She died, and immediately there was uprising in the street and women coming out. And this movement by women against the Islamic guards who try to enforce the veiling have been going on for a long, long time. It's not anything new, and had many legacy in the context of the Islamic Republic. However, this event was that breaking the back of the camel, or catalyzer. This was what happened in Tunisia when a police went with a vendor who was trying to sell fruits and did something and overturned his machine, and then the guy put himself in fire. After that, a revolution in Tunisia, and the government in a matter of months collapsed. And so in every country we have this. You have a lot of buildup of the pressure, and then it takes one event that ignites everything and puts everything to the fire. And that's what happened on there. Now this clip, and since then, there have been a lot of protests in Iran, and that's what my talk is going to be about. And about the latest protest and the nature of it and the successes and weaknesses of it. But I'm going to first show you a lot of data as what exactly happened. One of the things that has happened is that a lot of, with the modern technology, everybody is taping. Every day they're taping the protests that are taking place in different parts of the city. The treatment by police or guards and the Basijis or their mobilizers. These are another groups of armed people in the Islamic Republic, arms of the state, or people who are actually, plain clothes there. These are people who you don't know, but they themselves are agents of the government and act. So let's just start with the clip. I have translated for you what she says, so therefore we'll listening to the tape.
بیا بنویسیم مثل درس مثل مشق تو کتاب تاریخ فردا بیا بنویسیم ما هنوز زنده ایم زیر بار غم‌ها و دردا بیا بنویسیم روزگار قاتل امیده ولی ما میدونیم شب تار آخرش سپیده جنگ و قهر و تحریم و ستم این جهان پلشته کی میدونه غیر خودمون چی به ما گذشته هیچکی توی تاریخ قد ما خونه دل نخورده واسه یه ذره زندگی این همه نما.
This really it was very emotional for me, but it was also a strong and a brief summary of everything that is going on. Where in the history are there anyone to write about what has happened to us for a small piece of life? So after this event, students, particularly women, young women, came out in the streets and started protesting in different parts of the city, and slowly police will start confronting them. Many women began to actually take off their veil and throw it into fire or burn it, and cut their hair and a little piece of their hair, cut it, throw it, and dancing together in the street, and calling it a movement for happiness. So the title of this movement emerged out of a slogan which actually was used by the Kurds in Turkey. Between Turkey and Syria, actually, the region of the Kurds in Syria, which they had it in the past few years. Zan, Zendegi, Azadi, woman, life, and freedom or liberty. That's the name of the movement. Now, let me, before I start, I want to give you a little bit of a background, a couple of things. Next slide, please. This is where Iran is located. Very big, magnified, so you see that the countries all around it. This is significant to understand if you want to know dynamics of events that are taking place and will be taking place in the future, because it's pregnant with lots of, the region has been pregnant for a lot of conflicts in the past century, and the United States have been involved in it as well. No Western country really have been left, particularly the major powers, England, France, and the United States are the three major players in the game. They are the one, particularly the France and England, who basically set up this map in 1922. Before this, some of this country did not exist, and it was created. And then again in 1945-44, Israel was created. That was the last reshaping of the land. And who knows what will look like 50 years from now or 100 years from now, because the region is the home of the three major Abrahamic religion, Judaism, and all the three prophets came from this region. And the claim to the land is tied up or wrapped into religious issue, religious matters, and into history, and into traditions, and so on. Nationalism, so we have all kinds of nationalism. Each of these countries have their own nationalistic movement. There are different ethnic groups, and these ethnic groups have their own nationalism. They want to have their own country, or they want to have their own autonomy at least, or they're all being repressed by the central government in each of the countries that these ethnicities exist. So it's a good to understand this dynamic. One other thing I want to say about this map, that if you look at Iran, there are 13 countries surrounding it, and it has kind of border with each one of them. So you can imagine what a balancing act has to be for Iran to continually deal with the pressures that would come from outside, and opportunities as well. I mean, Iran itself, actually, during the Pahlavi period, 1930s to 1979, did not have a whole lot of outside ambition. The Islamic Republic, since 1979, has not had direct invasion of any country around it. However, being a theocratic government, claiming that it represents all the Shias on the earth and God on the earth, therefore it has tried to influence the population and as well as the politics and the Shias or Shia Muslims' lives in Lebanon, in Palestine, in Bahrain, and in Yemen now we are talking about, and Iraq. Iraq was, of course, an opportunity, a gift that Mr. Bush, the invasion of Iraq actually was a gift to really Islamic Republic, because it used to be dominated by the Sunni and Saddam. After overthrow, that gave opportunity, and the US helped. The Shias came to power, and since they have come to power, the Sunnis now see themselves as a discriminated or disadvantaged minority. So we leave that. Let's move on to the next. This is actually colors represents different ethnicities in Iran. That, again, is another major factor, sociological factor to consider if you're going to understand the dynamics of events and social movements and political gesturing from inside and outside. Each of these groups have their own language, their own culture, their own tradition. Not all of them are big enough to be or have been even in forefront of these changes, but there are three groups that are currently, actually I would say four. When you have a multi-ethnic community and society, that itself is a very important both asset and liability. Your asset because your population is diverse, your culture is richer, and so on, and you could do a lot with it. And it's a liability. Your enemies, outsiders, definitely would divide and try to gain. And that has happened, and it continues to happen. That's how Ottoman Empire was basically undermined and collapsed. Basically, France and England were involved in trying to win over those territories which had their own governors and told them, look, we are going to give you a country. You don't need to pay taxes. You don't need to provide soldiers to Ottoman Sultan. And let's pay it, you could be your own country. And that's how they set up by 1922. They divided to two territories of influence, and then they literally had to create the map that they did. They did promise actually the Kurds, who actually wanted to also have their own country, they said, we'll help you out later. Of course, once these countries were created, they're not going to let them break up. And so Kurds are in the Middle East, two groups, as we call them, stateless people. Kurds and the Palestinian in the region we are talking. Now there is also Arabs in the south, which continually Arab countries try to kind of promote some kind of nationalism there, and at times and all of these other ethnic groups, particularly on the margins of the country, they're all a lot of them are in the margins of the country. The dominant one I mentioned to you, the Arabs, the Kurds, and the Turks on the north, and then on the east, the Baluch. These countries have shared interests with the population culturally who lives on the other side, and they have similar ethnicity. So outsiders at times have either tried to push this population to more demand, because there definitely are margin in terms of social development and rights and treatment, no doubt about that. And then that part of it is developmental. In other words, in every country in the United States, the services that Los Angeles gets, Chicago gets, Miami gets, is very different than a small town like Bakersfield and Fresno, because it's a developmental issue. Capital, money, resources, technologies in the core area of the country, and then the rural area and the smaller town are secondary. If fashion hits New York, it takes about 2 years to hit in a small village in anywhere else. So part of that is the structure of the developmental structure of any country, but part of it is the specific treatment that this population have received by the majority population, or by particularly the ruling ethnicity, whoever that they to be. So they are disadvantaged. They do have rightful claims that they need to be addressed and issued, and grievances. And the governments, of course, being afraid of the decentralization and the disintegration of the country, often, unfortunately, being non-democratic, they have reacted with repressiveness, and that has, of course, been a source of challenge in most of the regions. Syria has that problem now, and Iraq has it right now. Actually, the Kurds now have an autonomous area thanks to United States, again, that invasion of Iraq helped the Kurds actually in Iraq carve out the area that they live, and they're actually selling oil by their own contract, even though they are a part of the structure, but they ignore the central government, and it will be a fight in the future. The Iraqis will probably, even the Shias who are in power, they are in a mess right now. The problem has not been settled. Once it gets settled, I have no doubt Iraq will go after, try to put pressure on this area to bring it under central control. So the same is Syria, you know, right now, the United States involved, Europeans are involved with the rebels, and one of the rebel area is also Kurds. And I don't want to go to the detail of this. This will take me away from that. So that's a very important dynamics. And the government of Iran considers this latest movement as a provocation by the United States and outside power, European and Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, who are provoking, you know, Arabs and who are provoking the Baluchis on the east and Baluchistan, and the Kurds on the northwest. And even the leader directly said, we do have some problems here. And basically, at the beginning, he defined it as to be ethnically provoked. But the problem is deeper, they much more deeper, much more widespread. And it's not just ethnic groups. Those ethnic groups definitely, when they see this opportunity, they are going to make their own claim too. However, the problem is the nature of the current regime in Iran and the way in which it treats all of its citizens, including Muslims of their own supporter, who now more and more daily they're losing their, basically they're losing their support because they see the treatment as to be not right. Now, let's go to next. This is very important also, one more factor you need to understand sociologically. This is the population of Iran. And if you look at it from 1800 to current time. So right around, I don't have here to show, right around here I have a rewriting here somewhere where they start taking off. In 1976, when I left Iran, or even I would say 1979 when the revolution took place, the country had 34 million population. Today is 85. So you can imagine what the challenge is right now. But I want you to look at this side. If you look at it, that's the hierarchy of the population. The bulge is right where the youth are. And that's why this movement. The nature of this movement is very different than any other movement we have had in the past. This is all young people, majority of them young people, young population. Its problem actually, as a movement, as a problem, I'll talk about it at the end of my speech, about the successes and weaknesses and the strengths as a movement, is because the top area, the adult past 35 and over, they have not joined the movement. They do support it, but they don't see a still or chance or whatever to come. We'll talk about that. Social movements, particularly, have become very radical and revolutionary. People have a sense, particularly people who are adult, have had experiences of things. If they have been through a war in Iran, 8 years of war, which has taken their children or their family member, if they have been through the revolution itself, which had a lot of family lost members and so on, killing took place, execution took place, and then lots of population had to leave the country. We have right now somewhere around, different estimate give us, about 5 to 8 million Iranians who live abroad. This is unprecedented in the history of Iran. And these people are basically their families, their home, and their structure of their personal and intimate relationship has been torn apart. Just for example, and this is the simplest of example. I do not even consider it even worth mentioning it publicly, but I never had a chance to visit my parents' death. My three brothers died. Never had the chance to go back to that country and share the pain and tell my parents in the last days or so on that, I love you too as well. So these kind of pains is what I was telling you with that young woman singing. What has happened to people? Whenever you have revolution, you are turning society upside down. And with that, lives of a lot of people. Right and wrong of the history is one thing, but the pains of the people is also a reality. Often we get into political action and political success or economic success, that's all it matters. But we forget Every day in the market, a stock market, you see somebody wins $1 million. Nobody thinks about somebody lost $1 million. How many people lost in this game? And that's the realities that, you know, sociologically, if you want to, you have to have a sense of, if you want to talk about compassion, understanding history and people's life in a deep way rather than in a superficial aspects of it. So that's another thing. Let's now move to the movement next. These are Iran, historically, if you look at it, since at least late 18th century, we have had constant, that's about the period of time where the Western countries are moving around the world, and we are becoming actually in contact. Well, we had it in 16th, 15th century, late 15th, with the Ottoman Empire had grown, and then the Iranian Empire at that time, Safavid. So the two regime, the Turkish Ottoman and the Iranian Safavid, both of them became big empires. But by the time of late 18th century, we are even in Europe moving into what we call modernity. It's a modern technology, modern revolution, French Revolution, and English Revolution. The concept of nation-state emerges. And from now on, we don't have empires, we have nations. And the nations might become imperialist. That is, they have ambitions above and beyond their own country. So today we don't have empires, but we do have nations which have imperialist ambition to control the area. But they don't do it in the old way. Old way was the empires, and you control and you demand it, you know, and so on. But nowadays it's different. United States is very powerful, you know, at least during the 1917 to 1990s, 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, you had basically now the communist world and the free world versus communist world, and there were countries were satellites of that camp, and then there were countries which were satellite of the United States, and that has changed now. And with the invasion of Ukraine, we are entering into a different globalization. We are entering into a totally revamping of what they call world order. World order keeps changing every so often. 1922 for the Middle East, that was a very important order. And when the wars in 2011, this Arab Spring, which were countries like Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, you know, and went through all of these political changes, a lot of people thought this is going to be a beginning of a different Middle East. And when the United States went to Iraq and Afghanistan, the idea was that it's supposed to be a different Middle East. Well, it didn't turn out to be all the way they planned. And still we don't know how things are going to evolve. Really, and honestly, you know, historian, even for, the historians in here who have talked about the end of the history, now he took his word back, that this is not the end of the history. History is a movement like a gigantic river. And when it starts flow, it has its own power and momentum, and it could go in many directions. And if we are wise as human, as societies, we will channel it to go to the right direction rather than just get wasted in terms of human lives and technology and resources and retardation or backwardness. I mean, like what happened in Afghanistan. 20 years of all of that was done there, and the result is we gave the country back to the very same people that we actually overthrew them. So history, in sociology, when we talk about the evolution of the history, there are those historians and sociologists and philosophers who look at the history in a very unilinear way. You know, that it's going to go through this stage and this stage and this stage, and it's a straight line. Many, even like Herbert Spencer, who followed actually Darwin, he admitted that this is like a tree, and the branches could go different direction. But on the hopeful side of the history, the curve is moving in the long run up, so far. And we do go up like this, but fortunately, so when you've indicated what's going to happen now or 10 years, I'm hopeful. Because humans fight for survival, for life, for meanings, for whatever meanings in their own life, whatever religion, whatever culture, whatever. So let's move on now. So Iran is one of the countries which are regarded constantly had protest and or movement. So we have Constitutional Revolution 1905 to 1911. That was a major revolution, a first such of revolution in the Middle East. And then we had the time of Reza Shah from power out. And then there was a period of time, and then we had nationalization movement, which unfortunately got frustrated by US coup d'etat, which brought Shah back in the 1950s. And then after that, we have Iranian Revolution of 1979 again. And since 1979, this current government have been in power, but we have had so many movement can we move back into that previous one? Yeah. If you look at that, these are the number of protests. It's not, the most significant one is 1999, which was a student protest, which was crushed. And then the next one, which is really important, is the 2009, which was called Green Movement. And that was crushed. That's the first time in that 2009 where an election was basically engineered, and therefore the candidate that was supposed to win is still under house arrest in Iran. And last week, actually, he issued Mr. Mir Hossein Mousavi. And the people came to our street, and their demand was, where is my vote? In other words, they wanted basically to see their candidate. But the regime has been successful to engineer most of the election. And even if their candidate loses, the funny thing about this nature of this regime is that the next day or the next month, the losing candidate are basically appointed to a post, a lot more than even the post of if it would have been in the parliament or somewhere else or in that position. And it continues to be basically a finger in the eyes of the population. And that's where things have built up. And that's why losing of a woman dying, and all of a sudden you have this outburst that is right now strangling the regime. And we'll talk about that. Now let's just go on. Now these are some of the pictures of the weeks and days of thing, and you can move on as flow on. So in the different cities, you see that this movement as it's shaping. One of the things about the nature of this movement are young people, and the most important one, also women. For the first time, women actively, particularly young people, young women, are all in the streets. And so the women issue becomes at the central issue. We'll talk about that later. And of course, ethnic groups, particularly in the two areas that I mentioned, northwest and the eastern part of the country, they're mostly actually have lost most of the people who are killed and in those areas. I'll show you the map of the charts slowly. So, move. Yeah. You see women have taken off, and then they come on the cars and so on. Let's just stop here. The streets of Tehran now, particularly Tehran, which is the biggest city of Iran, of course. Different estimates say it's about 8 million during the day. Some people say 5 million. But it is the largest city, and also a lot of people come during the day and working, and then they move to the regional. There are many of those, particularly governmental area or so on, which they can enforce and control of the women's cover. However, you see people, actually women walking without cover at all, and some younger husband, male and female, even husband and wife holding hands in the street. And at times, the nature of one of the tactic in this group is that it was mostly organized through social media. So the groups actually, they do it very location-based demonstrations. So they planned such that they all do not come in one place. So we will go to Santa Monica, and you guys go to Northridge, and you guys go there. And then as soon as the police comes, actually separate and go to 5 different arenas. So in other words, disperse the police ability to predict where they have to put their forces. Now, often it's done by we don't know who. mostly these young people are communicating with each other. There is definitely some coordination. You cannot be having without any coordination. But in the nature of sociological understanding of the movement, one of the things, the characteristic of this movement is, I'll talk a little later about it, is leaderless. We don't have any character that we specifically say is organizing. There's no one political party. The regime basically does not allow any political party to be engaged and be serious. And all the political parties that are there, they kind of have to give in to the demands of this. It's a very formalistic type of phenomenon. So then in order to understand this movement now, what I did is that I have, these are the data, daily update from Herna, which basically I put the source up there just as a way of sources. These data are very, very helpful to see what happened. So let's move on. This is the overview of 82 days only, from the beginning of the Mahsa's death to December, I believe, 7th or something like that. The next one, I'm sorry, back up. If the blues are all the places where protests have taken place, both universities as well as the cities. Next one. This is actually the basically university protest and city protests. So the orange one shows by days exactly, you come in day by day, they have graphed it. So you can see that actually the university protests are actually more prominent, and it's much more long, but the city protest is not as big, as large in terms of number of people involved and so on. Move on. Now this shows actually the protest concentration points, where more population are located. Now if you look at it, you see up there north, over in here is the northwest. This is an area, and of course those areas where you see red and black, that's Tehran area and northern Iran. And you will see it's going to pop up here is the Balochistan, which is this eastern part as well. Next. Now this shows basically in terms of widespread city protests by location and the dates actually. It specifies again the number of demonstrations that took place in each location around Iran. Again, you see much of it is in capital, Tehran, and then northwest again, and then you see over here Balochistan in the corner southeast. Move on. This is a strike location, and these are strikes. The red one are markets, so the businesses who close down, and then the blue one are the schools, and the green one are basically work or a school with, but it's a departure time. So these are the people who closed down and left from their activity. Next. This is going to show which number of universities and where in what location. A lot of them are in Tehran, and then a smaller town universities have much more government has control, so it has not been as easy to get out. But if you see that the universities in the center and also in the east, so this just shows that the kind of universities which are involved. And this one is talking about protest and based on their repetition. In other words, if an event took place in one place, again, the same place again. And most of it is in universities, if you look at it also, and so on. This one now shows the number of the cities where location of the people who have been killed by the authorities who were confronted. So these are. This is the largest. It was the largest one because these are the Baluchis, which are basically an ethnic groups, and they are Sunni. This is very important. It's an ethnic group, and at one point, so over 100 people were killed, and that had become a major challenge between the government. Government accuses that actually somebody of their own and had done this, and of course they are saying no, this was a real. People were actually in the mosque, leaving mosque, and then they put them all through bullet, and so that's where you see the large bulk. And of course to Kurdistan, which is up northwest, and Tehran as well. You see that these are where most of the killing took place by government authority. Next. This shows basically where the people who got killed, but they were mostly government forces or supporter of the government who were involved in confronting the movement. So much less number-wise, but it shows again, if you look at on the top, northwest, and again, Balochistan has a much concentration, where actually the state actually perceives this whole being, as these two ethnic groups are being provoked from outside and basically see it as a threat. And it depict the whole movement as an ethnic uprising provoked by the outside power. Now this shows the breakdown of the confirmed detained population. There was about somewhere about 25,000 people have been arrested, and then there were over 500 of them actually have been killed. And this was these are not actually the latest, it's the data about 20 days ago when I'm citing. And there are 111 or so of them, or 20 of them, accused of corruption on the earth and fighting the God. And that's death. Four of them young people were finally executed under this kind of sentencing. Protest was global, and fortunately, so far, they're playing around, the regime is playing around in terms of approaching the death as an execution of these young people. So again, they have not removed 120 people totally off the line on that accusation. But the killing machine of the execution so far have stopped at this point. I'm not saying that it is a gain only in the sense that the regime is under pressure, both internationally as well as nationally, and a lot of internally supporters of the regime have been trying to warn the regime. And the regime's tactic and response from the very beginning, no concession and a strong 100% suppression. But a lot of them said, look, the more you do this, the more this is going to get bigger and the more it's going to continue. And the regime has begun. About 10 days ago or a week ago, I don't want to be accurate and I don't know exactly the timing was, the Ayatollah basically said that the leader, 10,000 of these people should be released if they have not been in killing, if they have not done this, if they have not done that. So they have been released. Now the question, of course, remains when people are saying, look, if they had not done all those things, why did you arrest them and keep them for 2-3 months? Deny them the right to be with their family or their business and their activity and their schooling. So, but that's how regime has treated and acted and, so far. Now these are a verified number of underage children arrested, 36% of them girls, 74% of them boys, 67 of them. Move. This is basically percentage of individuals detained by gender. If you look at it, almost 80% men, about close to 18% women, 2% child male, and 1% child female. These are school children who actually have participated in. Move on. These are the number of police and other security forces themselves which were killed during the protests. There are 56, and then they divide by the level of the 2 lieutenant, 2 major, 2 levels of sergeant, and many of them colonel and so on. Next. Okay. Now I'm going to talk about the nature of sociological nature of this movement. The biggest argument that has not died out, and I was on a panel at the very beginning of it, and the panelist, one of them who is abroad, a political scientist, they insist this is a revolution. And I have said, and I agree still, and I am still saying that this is not yet a revolution. And, but the action, the events as they take place has a revolutionary character. It is the nature that you just go out and you are going to destroy the building. But you haven't done it fully yet. You just broke the door, you just broke the window, but you haven't brought the church down or the building down then. And there is a phenomena, we need to be really careful with the concept of movement, uprising, a strike. There are quite a difference between different ones. Rebellion. Revolution usually is when you want to turn the situation upside down. You want to get rid of a structure and replace it with another structure. I'm not talking about the bad and good of it. Again, you could turn a good regime and you put a bad regime back. But that's not the point. The point is that for it to be not a coup d'etat just removes a bunch of people, even a larger group, whether an oligarchy and so on, and another oligarchy comes to power. But this movement is a movement. But as a movement, that's one of the things about movement. Movement could become revolution finally. And it builds up. And it could end up with revolution. And revolution, when it happens, we can say revolution succeeded. But you cannot say that at this point it is or not. This definitely, I have a different perspective, an article that basically argued that from, again, back from the constitutional revolution of 1905 till now, Iran has tried to have what we call democracy, whatever you want to define it. No Iranian have the same perception of democracy. No Middle Eastern country, which we call today relatively democratic, has the same democracy that United States, or United States is not the same as Canada. Canada is not the same as Israel is. All of democracies, if we define it simply by the reality of election, parliament, and some level of control over the authorities on the top, so there will be a kind of accountability. So people could, the most important characteristic of any democracy is citizens be able to remove the person in power. If they cannot remove the person in power, then you don't have really democracy, even if you have parliament and election. Saddam Hussein he had election, but every election he became president for life. Mr. Putin, he has been elected, but he keeps playing games and postponing it and prolonging it. Same game with Mr. Erdogan in Turkey right now. I mean, a lot of these things we see around the world that happens. If you do, you have a very sick democracy. You have a very weak democracy. And so Iran and Iranian have wanted, usually they didn't use even democracy at that time. They used the word freedom. And they wanted to be free from the arbitrariness of the political power in the structure. At the time was king in the Qajar period. And when Qajar period overthrown, it was Pahlavi who controlled Iran till 1979. Again, they said freedom, and by freedom they meant that this arbitrary rule of the government, arresting people, determining for people, and limiting their rights and ability. So that was it. That struggle has not gone away. And we had also, and then the second one was basically freedom or democratic right. The second was the question of law. Country being a law-based country and government being a government of laws, rather than arbitrary, rather than based on ethnic privileges or ethnic or oligarchic claim and influence and manipulation and so on. So people know what the laws are and everybody could follow the law. Unfortunately, that had not yet fully have been implemented. The Islamic regime, when it came, the 1979 revolution, was a revolution, and it was exactly to overthrow a monarchy and have a kind of a republic where, again, you have an accountable leader. Well, very soon it was engineered by the clerical groups to actually turn it to theocracy. And there is a person called Wali Faqih, or Supreme Jurisprudent, who has the law and life of the country and the lives of the people in his hand. He could define, and his word is the word of God. This is where it gets really much more scarier than the previous king. Previous kings, at least, did not, even though they claim they are Zellullah, they are shadow of the God. Well, this one says, I am representative of the God, and I can claim, and I can cancel the parliament. I can, you're fighting God. It's a sentence that is given to people of corruption on the earth, very broadly. What it means exactly, how you could pinpoint it, how could a lawyer say that? The young man who was executed, one of the first one, he just had turned a trash bag, the trash bin, turned around and put it into fire, and a officer of the Basijis had come in, and they got confrontation. He himself has not killed or in that way. The guy died later in injury. So many religious leaders even came back and later said, this is not fighting God. Fighting God is that when there is a troops or army is trying to come and overthrow a government of religion and so on within their own. This was a debate within the religious leader. So anyway, the first characteristic is that it's not a revolution, but it's a revolutionary movement, and it's moving along, and it has done so the same way. Many at the beginning called it a feminist movement because of the fact that the issue was we call it forced veiling. And this young woman basically have died because of that. And the women came to the streets and so on, and young women. That is still something that most of the social scientists, and particularly activist social scientists, claim that to be. But remember the statistics. This is what I'm saying is that ideology and our wishes and willing is one place, but the reality is another place. Majority of the men who have died as well. It's not like, but women were in forefront and continue to be in forefront. One of the things that could lend itself to this idea of the feminist movement is that this is about control of women's body and rights, and claiming their rights in public as well as private, and individualism to be recognized not as a bunch of herd that the people can make a decision about their lives and their clothing and so on. They want to gain their own right and control over their own body, and who defines them, how to or should be outside or inside and so on. So in that sense, the movement is the feminist focus on human right and body. It is a civil disobedience, often trying to ignore the government. When we talk about civil disobedience, one of the things that I left it out is that a lot of people have defined this as a new social movement. It fits that category in somewhat, in the sense that in sociology, where we have these classical revolutions, French Revolution, the British Revolution or English Revolution, and Russian Revolution that basically changed the system from communist or feudal to the socialist system. We don't have the last of the classical revolution. It was Iranian Revolution, 1979. It was mass-based. It was all groups who were involved, and that was a very different. It was classical type. Social movements are, if you want to regard it, they are movements that are not necessarily going for political change. It's not the change of system. It's a change of behavior. So you have a women revolution in the United States, when women began to ask for their rights and ERA and so on. We have actually the revolution. Individuals are involved rather than social classes. So we have environmentalism as a new social movement. More and more people have raised consciousness about how to treat environment, how to treat our nature, and so much has come out of it. Buildings now do not have a smoking in it. Airports, smoking are gone. People themselves have become sensitive about, and the smoking actually in the Western country, particularly in the United States, has relatively gone down. So most of these cigarette companies are doing things in the third world country where there are not laws as much and promoting cigarette, but here they don't have that kind of ability anymore. or even the nutritional movements that, we all have become, even, KFC, it used to be Kentucky Fried Chicken, I remember when I came in this country. Now they moved it because they were afraid, but people now know fried chicken. Okay, I get sick, I'm gonna have a heart attack. So people do not know what KFC means anymore. And it is a movement that more and more people are eating better, are eating, exercising more, and so it's a movement which is for better living style and so on. One of the mistakes between people who take this word from sociology and then they translate it into politics is that to say that current movements are new social movement because they are computer-based, they are social media-based, and therefore it's not like the last time that working class movement, that workers come and overthrow, parties comes overthrow. Now people all over do that. But the fact of the matter is, these tools are tools. It helps, definitely, technology definitely has helped the social groups and social movements to be more effective, to have more reach and outreach, but yet, when you want to overthrow a state, you're dealing with an army. You're not dealing with just even one person who is president or king. You're dealing with the armies of the nation. And therefore, until you don't break that army, and it's going to be very difficult. That's one of the weaknesses of this movement I mentioned, is that it's basically relying on a street protest. A street protest by itself is not, Iranian revolution was a street protest. It has a lot of street protests, but behind it was the network of the mosques and the centers of the seminaries and the ayatollahs who were entrenched and they do have power. It's just to think about the church in the United States or in any Western country. It's, it's Vatican and it's empire, it has budgets, it has all kinds of resources. This movement, the bazaar did not come behind them. The bazaar is just wealthy. 1979, Bazaris were united, they were allied with Khomeini, and they supplied money to the families who got hurt. The back of the regime during the Iranian Revolution 1979 broke by the last act of the strike in the oil industry. That's where all the budgets of country comes. Who paid for the families to stay away? The bazaar, the rich people who work with the cleric. So revolutions require resources. Revolution requires some kind of a management to have effective action on the ground. So let's say the leader says tomorrow nobody comes out, or tomorrow let's say we are going to have a strike or we have demonstration, and then people heeds it. It happens. If I issue constantly a statement and say I'm against this, against that, we do this all the time. We sign, protest. Nothing happens on the other side. There has to be some gain, and a particularly incremental gain. In other words, the regimes have to sit back, concede, and become weaker. And most importantly also, that kind of weakness, that kind of decline for the old regime or the breakup, it has to have institutional element. The fact that you kill one police officer in the street is not going to bring the army down. It does create fear among the police. It's helpful in planting seeds of fear in the group, and then slowly some of the members of those old regimes say, I think it's about change. This regime is not going to last, and they're going to get me, arrest me, or kill me, or whatever, and I should go the other side. And in fact, that's what happened, how Ayatollah Khomeini neutralized the Iranian army. So the Iranian army basically came in and says, well, we don't fight anymore. The same game happened also in Egypt, 2011. The Egyptian army, which was supported by United States and still is supported by United States, stayed out of the war. Stayed out of the war. So Mubarak was collapsed. The regime, the new regime, the new election, Mohammad Morsi came to power, who was from the Muslim Brotherhood. In a year, the situation became clear. They're going away of Ayatollah Khomeini. And the army, the very man who was the defense minister of Mr. Morsi, basically made a coup. and turned the whole thing around. Mr. Morsi was arrested, put in the cage, and finally died, actually, in the court and so on. So again, institutional gain is very important. So the movement is demanding for a lot of tolerance, diversity, human rights, and individuality. If there is some of the good things about this movement, woman, freedom, and woman, life, and freedom. Life means happiness. Unfortunately, the Islamic Republic, being a Shia government, Shiism was a sect. Think about, Catholic, Protestant. So Shiism, this is the major division in Islam. Shiism have always regarded itself as a minority, and it is minority by number. Majority of Muslims around the world are basically Sunni. And the Sunnis also, most of the governments, Islamic governments, are Sunni. So Shiism in Iran is the first government of a Shia on the earth. And then, of course, the Shias of Iraq, with the help of the United States, have come, and so that's the second one now. So Ayatollah Khomeini's goal was to export revolution. And that's why they're in Yemen, that's why they're in Lebanon, and created Hezbollah, helped Hezbollah to gain. So they had not succeeded outside, except Iraq, which, again, as I said, it was a gift given to them, and so they had influence, and there's a lot of challenges there. So how much more time I have? I'm just going to wrap it up, quickly. So what are the successes of the movement? Successes of the movement, the most important one being that they put the regime on notice. And in that sense, women's concerns have become primary, and that's very important. And the other grievances that the population has and concern about the development in country, environmental movement, economic challenge, the country's dollar, the Tuman was our we have Rial is the currency in Iran, they call it Rial. When I left the country, it was 7 Tuman or 70 Rial. Today, as of this morning, it became 49,300 Tumans. This country has lived through double-digit inflation, 50% inflation right now. How could a population for this long, 4 years, to stay under that economic condition? Today is a miserable situation. A student of mine was telling me a little bit about the cost of living and what she could gain if she divorced, her money, mehriyeh, what would have been? 30 million today. I said, what can you buy with the 30 million? 1 month of living. I said, stick with your marriage. If you divorce, you only have 1 month of living cost. That's all there is. In other words, people's livelihood is wiped out by daily prices are going up, and the devaluation of the real or the country's money, and the people's home and values, all of this, as you can imagine what it is. Okay. The legitimacy of the government from the very beginning by those people who were overthrown had been questioned. But the revolution of 1979 had mass support. And they finally came to power. But since the beginning, as they began to establish a theocracy, they keep losing their political legitimacy. Slowly, keep coming down, keep coming down. The biggest bang was, of course, as I mentioned to you earlier, 2009. And then since then, it is just falling off much, much more faster. So the estimation between all of us is that social scientists that Iran has maximum of between 15 to 25% of support. And most of them are the people who are actually working for a state or governments and so on, and are in the particularly forces. The regime has almost about 8 different armed units. This is a very different regime than a normal country where you're going to have 1 army and 1 police. We have the police, we have the Revolutionary Arms Corps, Guardian, whose role is actually to maintain the revolution. And they have control of 60% of economy in their hand. This is another challenge for this regime, and so on. And this movement has basically made the hollowness of the regime and hollowness of the legitimacy has become bare. It's really put it into bare. So there are a lot of people who used to be supporters of the regime have become now critical, and they're moving out or becoming also opposition leader as well. Successes, of course, has been the strongest, vastest solidarity among Iranians abroad. I divide them between internal and external. Let's see our internal successes. Putting women in concern, I already talked about that. Okay. So the successes externally is generating the strongest and vastest solidarity among Iranians abroad. For the first time in the past 44 years, there have been widest demonstrations of Iranian Americans, Iranian around the world. The biggest one took place in support of this in January. 120,000 in Germany came together out in there. That's a lot of people. In the many cities around the United States, including Los Angeles, often we have had 4,000, 5,000, 6,000. This past weekend, the weekend before, it has become controversial because police had indicated at one report on one of the local TV said 3,000. I had people who were there, they said some 10,000, some said 30,000. And then the media claimed, some of the Iranian American media who are very political biased to their own agenda, some have said 80,000. And then one TV basically have claimed that it's 120,000. So you could imagine between 3,000 and so on. My own people who were here in the demonstration, some of them my own family member, were in there. They basically said anywhere from probably 5,000 to 10,000 people were there. But exaggeration is the name of the game here also. It's a political game, you know, you can see that. Okay, generating international attention. Celebrities around the world in Grammy Award and so on. In Grammy Award, one song by another young man had put together, won the first time. Actually, they created this award for social change. And the music of his music have been used all over, even in the fashion shows. They put this music and they're coming with it. It's really, those who are supporters of this movement in some way get excited that every time this thing, but then you put it in the wrong place, then unfortunately a little bit, you create a burden for the movement to answer what does this mean, what doesn't mean, you know, what is the movement wants to go to this direction or is it going to go that direction and so on. Finally, it had put a lot of pressure on the Western government. Iranians who are abroad for the first time, they created solidarity, and they're writing to their senators and their leaders in Canada. Government of Canada actually had decided a team of Iranian sportsmen could come over there and play. And then a lot of pressure was put in on him, and he finally canceled it. And in Europe, they were also putting pressure on the European Union to basically declare the Guardian Corps, declare it as a terrorist organization. And I had predicted from the beginning on one of the interview, they asked me, I said, I don't think it's going to happen. Some government may put them or here and there, but countries act on the basis of their national economic interest. And Europeans are not going to, all of them come together. And at the end, it ran into that kind of challenge exactly. Europeans said, you know, we cannot legally even impose on every country to say that this to be done. But some countries, the United States had declared the Guardian Corps as a terrorist organization. That itself has created some challenge for the very young people who, in Iran, they have to go 2 years of conscription. And one of the areas the government recruit them and put them is in the corps. And now, several of these people wanted to come to the United States for education. The US says that you have been a part of the Guardian Corps, a terrorist organization. So it creates a lot of legal challenges and so on. But it did create a lot of pressure on Iranian government. As of we are talking in Munich, there is a ministerial event taking place for Europeans and United States. For the first time this year, they did not invite Iran and invited 3 people from outside of Iran, which are opposed to. One of them is the son of the Shah. So a lot of signaling in this means, I don't want to go into it, I want to open up to questions. So it basically is putting a lot of pressure on the regime. Because the nuclear agreement has been collapsed, Trump made a mess by actually trying to taking it out. And now a lot of pressure for European and America is to get Iran back under control, their nuclear program under observation. Iran is not budging in terms of its demand. They did have a lot of negotiation. It didn't go anywhere. So some people declare it dead. But Europeans have this challenge, and America has this challenge, particularly America. They don't have anybody in Iran to report on them. There's no embassy, there is no consulate, and countries, if they don't send your people in the other country, you don't have the pulse of the situation. You're going to hear it hearsay from outside and you don't have reliable data to make decision. So that's the challenge right now the Europeans have. They want to get Iran back to the game again and try to control the nuclear activity of Iran. And Iran continues the enrichment. Actually, it has increased it to 60% now. So it's a very quite challenging. Maybe part of the game is to put this kind of pressure. I don't know whether the foreign governments have really interest of the Iranian people. The rhetoric says so, but the real motivation, of course, is hard to see. I stop here and therefore I answer questions. Yeah, I'm sorry it took a little longer than I. I'll be happy to answer any question you have. You're welcome.
We have to depend on Western media for what's going on. It's not always accurate. So I find it hard to believe that the United States is not involved in what's going on in Iran at any level. Have you heard, and I don't want to jeopardize anything that you said, have you heard that the United States or some Western countries are trying to influence what's going on so they can get control of the oil again? Because that really hurt the U.S. when we weren't able to get oil from
United States in recent years and decade has become more and more less dependent on the oil from Middle East. And much of its interest in terms of oil is to control it in terms of price affecting the price around globally, so because US also is selling oil itself. And the second part is that to control it where it goes. So let's say that the Chinese now are competitor with us. So the US interest is that to make sure the Chinese have a harder time to find the oil than to have an easier time. And Mr. Putin, now, because of Ukraine, again, that's the question of the pricing of the oil again, and those are the kind of challenges. More importantly now, in the past year, exactly, actually today or tomorrow, will be 24th would be the beginning of the next 1 year of basically anniversary of the war in Ukraine. Iran has been pushed now to move toward more Russia. Iran is supplying, Iran is helping, Iran is becoming more and more clients of Russia and China. That itself is not perceived by United States as something favorable at all. It's not just because it's one country. One country doesn't hurt Iran, but Iran has a significant role, it's a geopolitical role, and the weight of it in the global. It's the second largest reserve of gas in the world, and itself has a lot of oil. So it does have a significant. And then there is what we call elephant in the room. The state of Israel is in the Middle East, and the state of Israel's interest is tied very much with the United States. Even sometimes at times contradictory for the United States, but anyway, the point is, Iran's actions in particularly Lebanon has basically affected Israel, and Israelis consider Islamic Republic as a existential threat. So a lot of killing of the scientists and attack on nuclear facilities and so on is taken place by Israelis on Iran. Israel likes to have United States to put the pressure and do fight for Israel. But Israel has to play the game, balance this act. It cannot tell the Israelis no, but at any time that actually wants to say a no to Israelis, have to give some concession in order to be, let's say, nuclear development, nuclear agreement. Israelis were not for it, did not help it, and when it happened, they were very influential on Mr. Trump, and Mr. Trump was very close, so canceled the agreement, and it caused all of the problem that exists now we have. Now they are pushing it not to renegotiate again. So Biden administration originally said we want to do this, actually promised during the election, but afterward, again, the forces had pushed it down, and Iran itself has played fully stupidly. And what had happened is that it had not, and Israelis are anxious, and they say, if this nuclear development takes place, we are going to attack. So on the other hand, finally, any attack, any war with Iran, it's inevitably is going to involve the United States there. And the US at this time, its biggest headaches, it has even, I can exemplify it by balloons from Chinese. So the biggest headache is right now the Chinese. And that's most of the attention is moving toward China, their fear. And then Russia has become a problem. We are basically supporting this war. And basically, Jürgen Habermas is is a German philosopher. He wrote last week that the West should start pushing for negotiation. This war cannot go on the way it goes. Cost is unbearable, and the goals are very vague and unachievable, unattainable. In fact, I put those in my Facebook. The fact is that we can go on, and it's the Western countries which are supporting it against Mr. Putin. But the Putin is not, and is able to go on, even though it's the wrong side of the history. But the fact is he's able to go on. It's not a small country. It's a very resourceful country, and it's a repressive country. It could easily force people and keep fighting. So many are concerned about that. The United States is having the problem at home here with the political divisions we have, challenges, and economy and so on. Can we, should we continue? Even here, some Republicans are beginning to say the same thing, that to what extent, how much more can we go on? And this could go on. Afghanistan was 20 years of a lot of smart people at the beginning said this is not the way to do it. After 20 years, we left with a lot of humiliation and nothing, no gain. And for the country there, move backward. So it's a challenging situation. Whether any country is involved, of course. As I was mentioning earlier with Gila, if something happens to this church, all these houses around here, they're going to get activated. And everybody wants to make sure that whatever decision is going to be made about this replacement of this church is going to be good for them. And that's why you get the city council when you see there's a new building, a new development, they keep fighting. The countries are the same way. They are after their own national interests. They are involved. Of course, not all of them is visible, and I cannot read and say in exactly what United States are involved. There are a lot of theories out there. The US is doing this, US is doing that, Russia is doing this. But as a social scientist, I look at the bulk of the reality and how things could move, possibly. So US could be involved, but I don't think US wants a war with Iran. At this point, it cannot afford it. But it does not shed any tear on seeing Iranian government, being in trouble in that sense of the time. Oh, you're welcome. Yes.
A couple of things.
Can you help me with I can hear you.
Oh, yeah, okay. So you said that Israel does not want the United States to re-up that nuclear agreement with Iran?
originally, from the very beginning, Netanyahu and basically the conservative in Israel basically were against any kind of agreement with Iran because they see the nuclear agreement as a way of accepting that Iran has, because the nuclear agreement accepted that Iran could have nuclear power. As far as Israelis are concerned, no nuclear power. Iran says that it is for good purposes, it's for medical purposes. But Israel says we can't trust this. This is Israel's view, particularly the conservative group, the Likud party, that we can't trust this government, and because of the threat it had made against Israel, of course, and they basically no nuclear. Not only that, Israelis basically do not want any. It has been their policy from the very beginning when they became a state and powerful force in the industrial force, powerful technological force, and military force. I mean, they are one of the number one sellers of, one of the high sellers of military equipment around the world. So Israel does not want any of the countries in the Middle East have more military and nuclear capability. So therefore, that's their strategy. And therefore, they oppose anything that would give them. If you remember back during the early years, I was here in the United States, and there was this AVAXS plane, that we had this radar plane that it was. United States government approved to sell these to Saudi Arabia. Senator Church, I remember his name, from I think was Iowa or somewhere around there. He had signed it. They helped him to defeat him in the next election. In other words, they don't want any United States help these countries in the Middle East to become stronger than what they are. And I understand, it's in their national interest. That has to be understood the way the things work. That's what it is.
So you're saying that Israel is watching what's going on in Iran very closely, and it's almost, at this point, if things roll the same direction they're going, it's inevitable that Israel is going to attack Iran.
Iran believes and says this publicly, that it considers this movement as provocation by Saudi Arabia and Emirat and United Arab Emirates and Israelis and constantly, and United States and France and England. These are, but if anything has gone wrong in Iran, it's the fault of this country. Now the point is that there may be involvement, as I mentioned in the early answer. All countries act. They're not going to sit down idly and let somebody take, whatever thing is. But what it is exactly, where it is exactly, I am not interested in the conspiracy theories of one type or another. But the reality is that, according to one economist who is in Iran himself, actually who relatively works within the regime, 80% of the problem of Iranian economy is its own mismanagement. So 20% is because of the sanction United States and European have put on Iran. And I don't want to say that sanctions are good. Sanctions are hurting Iran, and the regime is able to transfer the pain to population. Because the regime has oil. Countries which have an asset, which what we call them in economics, they call them rentier state. They have something to rent and collect the money. If you have, and therefore you don't have to answer the citizen because you don't rely on taxes. In this country, the government relies on taxes. It has to listen to us as much as they do. But the fact of the matter is that those countries which have oil or some other natural resources that they want to sell outside and make money, the governments, especially if they're not democratic, they're going to do it in their own interests, and they are not going to listen to the citizens. It's a rentier state. And unfortunately, they pass most of the pain of this economic sanctions to the population through the manipulation. Basically, one of the things Iran has not signed for FAFTA, which means basically the transparency of economic transaction. Why don't they do that? because they are able to smuggle through, sell their oil, through all the, get around these sanctions. And that's why they don't want to go become like a normal government around the world and say, where money comes, where money goes, and where did you spend it, and so on. So Iran, as a tactic against all this sanction, has now developed its own. But when you do that, anytime you make things non-transparent, even in your own family, corruption evolves. This is a reality. Even within yourself, if you start husband and wife try to be non-transparent, your children play the game, your wife is playing the game, your husband is playing the game. That's where the corruption comes, because every bad things happen often with some kind of a cover and a shadow. And so, you're welcome.